about what you've been doing with vodcasting.
Thanks, Phil.
Hello, everybody. This is my go-to stance when I'm introducing C3PO, or carbon crunching clerics, as we have come to call it over the last few months. So at the beginning of the lockdown last year, I started a podcast called Sackcloth and Coffee. And I'm part of the St. David's Diocesan Creation Care Action Group. And so we decided as part of that we would, as a special, we would do a creation care podcast as part of the Sackcloth and Coffee for Creation Tide. And we would talk about what clergy and laity could do throughout Creation Tide. We would give them resources and ideas for what they might do to engage with creation care and Creation Tide throughout that time. Well, it transpired it was quite popular, the podcast itself, so we decided that we would continue the podcast, but we changed it from being just a podcast to being a YouTube vlog, really, which we've termed a vodcast, hence vodcasting with Vowels. And the idea behind the podcast, or C3PO, is that we're trying to help churches in St. David's Diocese and further afield to weave creation care into liturgy and to services, and we've been doing that really via looking at the lectionary. We've been doing some sort of biblical exegesis for our listeners, giving them resources, ideas, and sort of bringing our liturgical knowledge into the vodcast. My role is that of chair. I keep Neil and Marcus well and truly under control, and any guests that we might have, particularly Neil, who you will find out in a minute can talk for the whole United Kingdom. I try and make sure that we don't run over time. I try and keep them all on topic, which is sometimes quite tricky, but I also act as an audience proxy, so try and ask the questions that other people might want to ask throughout the session. Most recently, we've had also Dr. Julia Edwards, who is our new climate champion for the Church in Wales, and Jeremy Wadia. So we have guests come onto our vodcast. And finally, after I have done this and I've managed to keep Neil under control, I do the editing. I edit the videos and the podcasts and I put them together. And then up until recently, they've been going on to our diocesan website, but we now have a YouTube channel that I'm in the process of setting up. And I'm sure many of you can find that later on if you wanted to have a look for it. So at that point, I'm going to pass you over to Neil, who's going to talk to you further about his role in C3PO. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Sophie. So Sophie talked about the fact that we try to make the videos, the vlogs, as accessible as possible, and accessibility was a real key going forward to us. We wanted to really maximize the engagement to get our message across, and of course key to that is planning. Our planning sessions tend to take two forms. Firstly, we'll meet informally about once every 3 months at a time and plan out in general what we're going to be covering, including our special editions, and then we meet for a more sustained planning exercise, mapping out the individual vodcasts. In doing this, we are acutely aware that we are not just trying to maximize numbers in terms of audience outreach, but also maximize the way that people interact with the vodcast. And both myself and Marcus have a scientific background, Marcus in environmental science and myself in science communication. And a really useful tool that I found that we use, that we've adapted for this planning exercise, is what's called the Vowel Analogy of science communication. It was pioneered by Burns, O'Connor and Stocklemeyer in 2003. You know the vowels, A, E, I, O, U. They constructed an analysis of the way that people received information, and that led them to formulate this model. And they argue that each and every one of us has a different primary way of receiving information. but it's covered by all of these 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U. You may have one vowel that's particularly dominant, but they're all there. You may be an A person. You like having your awareness raised. You may be an E person. You need to be entertained to be able to access the information. You may be an I person. You need your interest to be piqued. You may be an O person. You're looking for someone to express a strong opinion that you can either engage with negatively or positively. Or you could be a U person. Understanding is key for you, getting those facts and figures across. So when we plan our content, we do that with the vowel analogy in the back of our mind. We try to create a healthy mix of approaches that will maximize audience engagement. Yes, all about giving out key information, but we also have some fun along the way so that the people who access things through that strong E, a little bit of banter, that always helps. We try to provoke discussion, and we're also not afraid of being a little bit controversial. So when we plan our content, we bear all these vowels in mind. And creation care, which mixes theology and ecology, is particularly well suited to this model. And it's something that you guys can use in your own outreach as well. It's not just for the way that you can use it in vodcasting or podcasting. You can actually analyze your own activities using the vowel analogy, like a sieve. You can drop what you're doing through the sieve and work out which one of the vowels is maybe missing. So who are you not necessarily engaging with? So it can be used to plan outreach and to analyze existing approaches to see that way that they can be improved. I'm going to hand over to Marcus now.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, so with a venture like this, it's always evolving really and changing. And but our sort of our starting point was to try to resource church leaders, you know, vicars, worship leaders, or those responsible for activities around the church or in the churchyard, you know, so that they could, as Sophie said, sort of try and weave creation care into worship and activities throughout the whole year. You know, as you know, we've got the season of creation through September, but you know that's only a short season. You know, includes harvest, and so there's the whole rest of the year to sort of think, well, how do we sustain, you know, a sort of care for creation throughout all our liturgy? So that's been our aim. So each month we'll look at the what's ahead. You know, what season we're in, if there's any saints' days, festivals, and so on, and see what we can draw out from those and link to sort of creation care themes. And I think it's helpful. I think there's a few of us, you know, each brings something different, as sort of Neil and Sophie have mentioned. You know, Neil's sort of brimming with ideas about engaging youth and children and young people with sort of, I don't know, visually and with tactile things to do, and that's just really helpful to have those sorts of ways of engaging people. I tend to sort of major on the theology because I really enjoy that. You know, I can't seem to get away from it. And Sophie brings it to life, threads it all together, and as she says, is like an audience proxy and asks questions we hope people want to know, but then does the hard work behind the scenes of editing it all and getting it out there. So the team effort is helpful, I think. So if we think of the sort of thing we do, so you know, we're coming up for August, so we'll have a look at August and think, okay, what's going on this month? Well, liturgically, we're in those sort of endless weeks after Trinity in the Anglican, in the sort of common lectionary, where it's Jesus' teaching in different lections, you know, come up. But there are a few points dotted through that. So if we look at August ahead, well, interestingly, it starts this year on Sunday with Lammas Sunday, Lammas Tide, which probably know it's a fairly ancient agricultural celebration, really, of the first of the wheat harvest, and it's been incorporated to Christian worship, giving thanks to God for that, you know, for that harvest. And there might be a lammas loaf that you bring into church. So there's a sort of harvest theme to run with, but it's quite interesting because it's the first fruits of the harvest. I think it touches well with themes of seasonality, you know, and we know that because we're used to having food year round from around the world, which we can thank God for in some ways, but also it comes at a great cost, doesn't it, with food miles and you know, sort of emissions and so on. So Lammas time could be a good time to think about, you know, seasonality and those sorts of wider issues. Also in August, then we've got, for example, we've got Feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So you might not immediately think there's a creation care theme there, but some very striking ones, I think. So as we traditionally celebrate Mary, you know, as in obedience to God, God's will, bringing forth the first fruits of the new creation and giving birth to Christ. But that gives us, I think, a really helpful pattern for our engagement, you know, a general pattern of discipleship, really, whereby as Christians, through our obedience and submission to God's will, we're called to participate with God in bringing to birth, you know, the new creation, you know, which work with Christ in doing that. And as Christ's incarnation reminds us that Christ was born fully human, fully divine, and fully human, not just psychologically, but, you know, human as embedded in creation, you know, in a community of creation, one of the animals raised up from the very earth, you know, like Adam was described in Genesis. So there's very sort of strong themes of our embeddedness in creation and our role in bringing forth the new creation. You know, so much to think about there. And as a third theme, thinking about August, we discussed this in when we recorded August podcast the other day, thinking about issues of Sabbath. You know, August being a time of holiday, particularly if you've got school children, then holidays in August. And it links well with Sabbath, doesn't it? And a Sabbath day's rest, delighting in creation, learning to love it as God does by dwelling there and noticing, you know, and taking refreshment from creation. But also there's this sense of the Sabbath teaching us about sufficiency. You know, there's enough for us. We don't have to work and labor all the time. We don't have to try and thrash productivity from ourselves or the earth all the time. God wants to give us what we need, you know, and that's a very Christ-like message when in that speech, for example, consider the lilies, you know, they neither spin nor weave, but they're arrayed in all this finery, or the birds, and God feeds them, they providing what they need. And that links with the Lord's Prayer then, doesn't it? You know, give us this day our daily bread. Don't be thinking about storing stuff up all the time. God will give, you know, this day what's sufficient. So lots of themes really in August, which at first glance might seem one of those rather sort of blank Trinity seasons. There's a lot there, I think. So that's been our intention really in the podcast, to try to help people bring to light, you know, the sort of creation care themes that are there throughout all the year, and particularly in a liturgically based church like the Anglican Church, like as a church in Wales is, working through the liturgy as a really useful way of changing hearts and minds really, and educating people and embedding into prayer and worship, you know, themes of creation care. So that's been our sort of aim in our sort of small pocket of the church out in West Wales. We hope it's having an effect. It's a project in progress. We enjoy doing it, and just wanted to share what we've been up to with you. So that, I think, well, I'll hand over to Phil, but I think there's time for questions. But I'll let Phil
definitely time for questions. If you do have any questions, guys, just throw them into the chat like we have been doing for the last couple of days, and I'll pass those on to the team here. I find that so encouraging. Every seminar's been encouraging, but for me, this one, seeing your creativity and your willingness to put yourselves out there, I think from my personal experience of church and a lot of other, you know, my friends, we see that, you know, it's quite easy to just do a sermon on a Sunday and just, you know, do it for the congregation that are there. And then through COVID, everyone's been, oh, but we're on YouTube, anyone could watch us. So what happens if so-and-so from, you know, wherever makes a comment? Have you guys had any experience with people kind of, any tricky situations that this has got you into? Maybe something, and how you've dealt with it?
We haven't had any comments as such, particularly that I am aware of. Certainly nothing that's coming on the YouTube channel. Whether Davis had any in through via the diocesan website, I wouldn't like to say, but we certainly haven't had anything other than good comments. We had one the other day. Neil, what was the comment that you had the other day?
Well, we were we put in a suggestion about doing an all-night vigil on the beach with the youth for the Transfiguration, for the Feast of the Transfiguration in August, and have that idea of as the sun is rising, because we are a coastal diocese. We do have the Procellis as well, so you didn't just have to do it on the beach. But straight away, somebody came back and said, oh, I've taken that idea and I showed it to my youth group, and we're now going to camp out on our local beach, and we're going to do a series of reflections all about the Transfiguration. And then as the dawn comes up over the sea and we see that light for the first time, we're going to worship, and we're going to think about, you know, God being part of all of creation and what Jesus's light reveals to each and every one of us.
Awesome.
It's very easy to slip into the, you know, you do the same thing every year, particularly when we're following a lectionary and you get into a rhythm, and it's very easy to become, oh, well, we did that last year, we'll do it again this year. So I think what's quite nice about the C3PO is that we're giving people different ideas, not just our ideas, their ideas and resources from various places. And we're putting them in one place, so people they know where they can go to find some ideas about what they might do in the coming months, that's involving creation and creation care within the liturgies. Yeah, so it seems to be working. We keep tweaking it all the time, but it's slowly but surely working.
Excellent. And Mike has asked, are you keeping stats on the numbers of hits you're getting? And kind of with that, I'm interested to know, do you feel like you're reaching a wider audience than you would otherwise in your sort of day jobs, if you like?
So
Sophie might have ideas of stats, but I'm definitely reaching a wider audience. And I wouldn't know in terms of numbers, but I've known even from some of my parishioners tune in, probably out of interest, thinking what's the vicar up to, you know, but they just would not have done that before, I don't think. I mean, the pandemic has helped people engage digitally, hasn't it? I'm sure that's helped as well. And then people share it. So it's funny, it can take on a life of its own, can't it? When it's out there on the internet, and then you lose track of who's watching it. But for sure, people do, you know.
Kind of see it as well as we're reaching those force multipliers. So you wouldn't necessarily have an average member of the congregation of an Anglican church tune in, although you could do. But what we do have is colleagues, fellow clergy, worship leaders, lay readers, who are getting those resources as they plan the next month, because it comes out a month in advance. It gives them the opportunity to reflect on the month ahead and to do some planning and to engage and talk with their congregations. So hopefully our conversation is the beginning of the conversation that they have. So we're hoping that the people who are listening, those who've taken the time really to become engaged, then go off and become those force multipliers, and use the lever to try to shift our brothers and sisters in the Anglican Church. Because in the end, with this gathered Eucharistic community, with gathered liturgical community, and if we can reach them in that space, that safe space, and start to talk to them and engage them about really challenging things, then maybe we can use that to send them out.
Excellent. Love it.
As far as stats are concerned, the YouTube channel, I think there are only 7 subscribers, but the views are somewhere, depending on the videos, anywhere between 50 views and 120 views. That the actual YouTube channel has only been going a couple of months, so it's taken a little while to build up. I don't know how many have been seen on the diocesan website. So previously it was all on the diocesan website. I don't know how many hits that they were getting, but certainly that still continues. It still gets uploaded to the diocesan website, so I'm guessing anywhere up to 200 people are seeing it every month, I would imagine at this stage. Yeah,
that's another thing for us to be praying for. We've heard of loads of different new initiatives that are happening and small beginnings and little things starting to kick off. And so, yeah, I'm definitely going to add you guys to my prayer list,
Thanks, Will.
my mental prayer list.
Yeah.
We've got a question here about other platforms, whether you've tried other types of social media other than YouTube. Any dabbles with that? Any TikTok happening?
I don't know.
No TikTok. I've got
Do you
teenage.
know what TikTok is?
I've got
I do.
I'm not so sure.
So yes, I'm inundated with my teenage daughters who just seem to randomly flail around the kitchen when I walk in. Seem to be doing the latest TikTok dance. All three of us are members of the Climate Change Action Group within the diocese. And that does have its own Facebook page. And we're also doing a virtual pilgrimage in the diocese. From St. David's up to Glasgow, COP26. We've all, lots of us across the diocese, including the bishop, have all signed up to agree to do 2.9 kilometres a day on average, which will get us to Glasgow. And we have people who have engaged with that process on Facebook and Twitter, and they've been posting regularly, as well as the members of the Climate Change Action Group.
Amazing. I mean, that's how things grow, isn't it? Snowballing and connections and relationships. That's what it's all about. So, well, thank you. Go on, Sophie.
I was just going to say there is the podcast as well. So Sackcloth and Coffee is the podcast that started the vodcast, but that still continues. But it's slightly different. It's not specifically creation care related, but that still continues. And there are other things that we're looking at, but we haven't. It's slowly but surely building it up.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, numbers are interesting, and it'd be gratifying if it went hugely watched by loads of people, but it isn't really necessarily our aim. You know, if we can just sort of do our bit in our diocese, that's great. If it goes wider, that's lovely. But it's just about, you know, I know the task is urgent, but we're actually starting almost at the beginning of a road of changing hearts and minds in some ways, you know, within the church. So it's just a really helpful tool, I think, to do that locally.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to finish there so that people can go away and make some dinner before our final session of the day. But thank you guys for sharing. Very exciting. I'm definitely going to go and look your YouTube channel up and subscribe right now. So yeah, very helpful, very encouraging. And thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having us.
Phil.